Today, and the chair will be here very shortly.
Okay, thank you. Hillary Gittleman, the Planning Director. I'm joined by...
Yes.
Oh.
Roll call. Regional Housing Mandate Committee.
Councilmember Holman?
Here.
Councilmember Price?
Here.
Councilmember Sharp?
Here.
Chair Schmidt? Here, present.
Well, I'm Hillary Gittleman, the Planning Director. I'm joined by Tim Wong. We have two items on the agenda today. The first is just to review where we are with our work plan and schedule. And I'm going to let Tim explain where we are on this, and then I'll be happy to jump in and answer any questions. After that, we're going to talk about the programs part of the housing element and give you an update on HCD's input so far and some of the correspondence we've received on the draft.
Okay. Can you make one more comment? Are there any of the members of the public here who want to speak to items not on the agenda? Thank you. If there are members here who want to speak to items on the agenda, please fill out a comment.
Acting chair.
She'll use her mic. Yeah. So, did you want to fill out a card? No? Just wanted to see us, come visit. Okay.
Okay.
Seen you in so long.
All right. Good afternoon. Tim Wong, Senior Planner. And since we haven't met since the last meeting was in May, a number of things have happened as part of the work plan. Some significant dates is on July 7th. We did submit our draft to HCD for their initial consultation. Be happy to announce that Palo Alto was one of the first, or one of the faster jurisdictions in the county to submit for HCD review. Number 3 actually. So through the work of the RHMC and the other advisory groups, that we were able to submit a draft. And so HCD is currently going through the review. They have 60 days to provide official comments. We have had a initial discussion with HCD that we'd be happy to present a summary of those discussions for the second item. But in terms of the work plan, we are on our way. We're moving forward. We've been meeting our schedule, plus or minus a week here and there. But all in all the items outlined through July have been completed. And looking forward, some key dates are August 20th is the proposed rollout or the 30-day review period for the initial study, environmental review for the housing element. And the next step is also September 10th is the first meeting with the PTC to review the draft housing element. And we are looking at an October 1st date for a second meeting for the PTC to make their recommendation. And the community panel is continuing to meet on a monthly basis to finalize some of their proposed programs. There is a summary that is listed in the Agenda 2 staff report about some of those proposed programs that they are talking about. And so, yes, happy to report that we are moving along, meeting our schedule, and with a final November meeting with the council for their adoption. So.
I would just add one thing, looking ahead to where the Regional Housing Mandate Committee's role in this. We're thinking that at your next meeting, we could, if we've heard from HCD, begin talking about how what adjustments we have to make to respond to their comments. And we'll have the CEQA document, which is going to be a simple initial study, neg deck. If there are any comments or questions about that, we could talk about that at the next meeting. And then it would be at your October meeting that we'd want the Regional Housing Mandate Committee to make a recommendation to Council on final revisions to the document.
Hillary, could you explain a little bit what the CEQA process is? You say a short form. What exactly would it be?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think what we're thinking is that the level of change we're making in this document and the horizon year of this document is only an 8-year plan, is, it's small enough that it will qualify for a mitigated negative declaration, or it's just a negative declaration.
Just an ND.
Maybe not even a mitigation, based on the document that was prepared for the last update. Very similar set of issues. We've been able to use that prior document quite a bit, draft something up, but it has to be circulated for public comment for 30 days, and then finalized and adopted as part of the action on the housing element update.
Excuse me, Councilmember Schmidt. Yes, we are anticipating a simpler negative declaration since a part of it is we have selected sites that are in conformance with zoning and the comprehensive plan. Therefore, no additional review is necessary for those sites. So that's our anticipation.
Now, the schedule says you'll have that out fairly shortly. So I guess the members of the committee will get a copy of that right away. Yeah.
Similar question, and initially I was thinking it could almost be just because there weren't any zoning changes, that it could just be an environmental checklist. But then I was realizing, but wait a minute, this is after the comp plan has literally expired, so the comp plan EIR has, it's dated as well. So circumstances have changed, and the environment has changed since. So really, how simple is the CEQA analysis for this, because it has to consider the changed environment? So maybe it is or maybe it isn't as simple as what we've been talking about.
Well, again, we're going to do something very similar to what was done for the housing element update a year or so ago. So it's using an initial study checklist, but explaining under each topic area what the potential impacts associated with the housing element policy changes are based on the current environment. So, I don't think it'll be anything really complicated or complex, but we have to, this is something that we have to do to comply with the law. And when you get it, if you have questions or concerns about any of it, we'd be happy to talk to you about it.
And I guess the follow-up question to that is, what kind of data is available to analyze this as the environment has changed since the comp plan EIR was done? Because data is one of our things that seems to be like elusive or lacking or whatever, or lagging, however you want to look at it.
Yeah.
So what will be used for evaluating the current circumstance?
Well, I guess
Conditions, I should say.
for evaluating the impacts of the proposal against existing conditions, you mean? So the baseline is the existing environment, and what we're doing is considering whether anything that we're proposing here in this housing element would somehow have a significant impact on that environment. I don't know, I haven't looked into it in the document in detail, but we weren't expecting to do anything all that complex, given that we're not proposing dramatic policy changes or zoning changes.
I think I'm not answering my question very well. I guess what I was thinking about is, yes, no zoning changes, but the circumstances have changed from when we thought we might have to look at either rezoning, downzoning, upzoning, whatever we're going to do. So it's that baseline. What are we using for our baseline for current conditions to see if these projects, should they get built, what kind of effect they would have? I don't know how else to state it than that.
We will have to do our best to characterize the existing conditions with the data at hand. This isn't the schedule and this obligation that the state has created with this deadline of theirs is not a circumstance in which we can do a lengthy, data collection, data mining effort and present a whole lot of data. We've deliberately, I think all of us, tried to design a project here, an update that is really minimal in terms of its policy changes, so that it won't have an impact and require a lengthy review. So we'll do our best with available data to characterize the baseline and talk about what the potential impacts are.
See, a follow-up question, Councilmember Price.
And so many of these elements are programmatic as well. So, I think because there's no zoning change, it's pretty much, you dust it off. We've added we've taken a few programs away. We've added some, I think, important programs. But the issue of existing conditions and change and all that, that will be covered with under the umbrella of the program EIR for the comp plan. So that's where the real effort will be. The one of the 7 required elements, as we all know, is a housing element. But you do not do an equivalent level of data preparation for existing elements for the housing element. You do some, but it's at a much different level than the real effort will be in the comp plan program EIR. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I think that's a good point. And part of the reason for that is, as I said, a housing element is really an 8-year document. A comp plan is meant to last much longer than that, and it will be a much more detailed analysis. I'm expecting that this analysis on the housing element is going to be mostly qualitative, just based on the fact that we're not proposing big changes here at all. We're going to be able to do a more qualitative, programmatic, kind of, less intensive evaluation.
Okay, any other follow-up questions? Okay. Go ahead.
The other question is, in September, the last bullet there says, completion of nexus study for use in updating impact fees subsequent to housing element adoption. So I guess the 2 questions. One is, are you saying it's going to come to us subsequent to the housing element adoption, or I wasn't quite sure what that meant.
Well, the study will be wrapping up in that time frame, but we are not proposing to bring to the council any recommendation on impact fees until after the housing element has been put to bed. So a nexus study is the background research and analysis that you use to adjust your fees. We just don't think we can tackle the fees until after the housing element is out of the way and adopted. But once that happens, we do want to bring to you an analysis to change our housing impact fees. And in fact, that's a program we've identified in the housing element.
Certainly, yes, we need to bring the Nexus study, but after the housing element adoption, because the Nexus study will be very important in supporting the BMR programs that are listed in the housing element. So the Nexus study would be implementation of the BMR programs that are listed in the housing element.
So just one, because at the Finance Committee we've been looking at impact fees, and one thing that has been a little frustrating and maybe even confusing is at some points in time, the commercial development is broken out to, R&D and manufacturing and general office and retail, and sometimes it's all lumped together, but they all have different impacts. So when you're looking at that and bringing it forward, would you please break those out into the different categories? It'd be much appreciated if you could make a note of that.
I had a quick follow-up to
Yeah,
Karen's.
please.
So the whole impact fee thing is really interesting. I've been actually talking to some of the merchants and the restaurant owners, and I didn't realize that, a lot of waiters make, somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000. And so when we do this Nexus study, I'm going to be really interested in seeing if we're making the argument that it supports the people that work, in the service industries, that we actually then focus the BMR programs, and that it actually is true. It's not just this is for firefighters and teachers, when we all know that neither firefighters nor teachers qualify. And I think that's really important that we be honest about who we're actually going to, if we're saying that this nexus is going towards service workers, which was basically what they did in Mountain View. They said, right, this generates more, and so therefore you get that increased.
I wonder if we could save that question to the next item on the agenda where the nexus fee is discussed. We're just looking at schedules now. Councilmember Price?
Yeah, just a question. When you use the phrase adopted, do you mean adopted or certified?
Certified.
Certified housing element. Great. Okay, so that's January
Hopefully by
2000.
the deadline is to submit to get it certified. So hopefully, by the end of January 2015.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Last question on the schedule. The last time the RHMC meets here is October. Is that right, that there is no role for the Regional Housing Mandate Committee after October?
That's right. As I understood the charter of the committee, it was to assist this year with housing element adoption. So after October, once you make a recommendation to the council, unless the council would refer something back to committee, we see your work is done. I'd love to talk to you and to the next mayor about a continued role maybe in the comp plan process or this impact fee question or whatever we decide. But in terms of
the housing element.
Housing element, I think that's it.
Okay, I guess that's important that we should talk about that at the October meeting. Councilmember Holman.
I remembered that the city was going to continue looking, and I presumed it would be through the committee here. We're going to continue looking at different or optional sites to what we submit, that would be an ongoing process. That's what I was recalling from a couple, 3 months ago.
Well, thank you. It was a recommendation of this, sort of a recommendation of this committee, but then the council did say we want to continue to look at housing sites through the comp plan process. And so that's why I was thinking maybe this committee next year is broader than just housing. It could hang around and help with that.
But it's a subsequent decision of the council who has made
I'm
that.
kind of getting outside my pay grade here. I mean, it's to be discussed, I think, after our current task is completed.
Okay, so the October date is for the housing element, and we have that clearly in mind.
So I actually think that's the issue. I think that our current task is not completed. I think that we all basically agreed that we were going to go with this housing element, but that there were a lot of questions about, and I don't think it should be broader than housing, frankly. This committee is about housing. And if we're going to make amendments, which is what we talked about through the comp plan process to this, that's the role of the committee, because our work's not done. We basically said this is an interim agreement. This is an interim housing element. We are going to amend this, possibly, but that's what we're going to look at as we do the comp plan. So that was sort of my vision of what this committee continues to do, since we don't really finish the housing element.
Well, let's make sure in terms of scheduling that we have an item on the agenda in October.
So let me also, is the community panel staying together as they go through the comp plan?
You're right. We did talk to the community panel about staying together through that comp plan process to look at this issue of sites.
See, I thought you did, so I thought that would then read, and so if the community panel, I just think we should flow it that way.
That's a very good point.
Good. Thank you.
So
No.
nobody wants to let go?
Actually, it was tough to get the community panel to agree to continue, but they ultimately.
And we're like, can't we?
Yeah.
Okay, does that take us to item 2 on the agenda?
So the intention of item 2 was to allow us to really discuss the status. Tim can give you a quick summary of what he learned from his conversation with HCD. We can review with you the correspondence we've received so far on the draft housing element. And then our hope was that we would have time to talk through the programs that are under discussion at the community panel, which are on packet page 11, I think. So maybe, Tim, you could take us through those 3 things?
Sure. Just to start with our conversation with HCD, staff had a conference call with HCD on July 31st, and the comments from HCD were relatively minor. There were some administrative revisions that they would like us to do to clarify. For example, currently our definitions in the land use code say that transitional and supportive housing is a multifamily residential use, and they wanted us to change it to say that it's a residential use instead. So it's those type of, so those could possibly go into single family or lower residential density zones. So it's those type of small tweaks that they wanted us to do. There were some cleanup items with SB2, our emergency shelter ordinance, that they wanted us to clean up also due to changes in state law. But again, relatively minor. I'll be happy to go into detail about those changes if you really wish. But their main concern was that we did not include our lot consolidation programs in the draft housing element. But I would like to point out that, and it's explained in the staff report, that when we took some initial programs for the RHMC to review that we had recommended to remove, one of the programs was about lot consolidation, but the RHMC chose not to remove that program, but to revise it. And that revision was inadvertently left out of the draft housing element. So we shall be reporting back to HCD that, yes, the city does have a lot consolidation program. It has been slightly revised. However, the program will be included in the housing element, and we'll see what HCD has to say about that.
Let's just point out where
Oh.
that is. It's on packet page 9 at the very bottom. That
Thank you,
last
Hillary. Yeah.
Program is the one that this committee revised and wanted to retain, that we left out by accident in what went to HCD. So hopefully they've asked for it. We can say, hey, here it is. And it'll
Yeah.
be good enough for them.
Good.
And that also dovetails into some of the comments made by outside organizations. You should, at places received letters from...
Before we leave the HCD, is there any
Oh.
questions or comments by council members on the... Yeah, let me raise one point on that. I did note on page 65 of the draft, very bottom paragraph, talks about our success with mixed use.
So where are you talking? Bottom of page 65?
Yeah.
Okay.
It says we've had successful mixed-use projects that have worked, and then you cite 4 recent cases. And the 4 recent cases add up to 13 units. And my experience with mixed use is there's usually a token residential units in there that allows a much larger development, but does not add much to our housing needs. Now, that would imply that our changing the language from amend the zoning code to consider amending may be a movement in the wrong direction. If the best we can do is 13 units, that's not very impressive.
Well, we have
I guess
used examples. Sorry, go ahead.
I guess I was going to say, I'm not sure that that's exactly the same issue. With, I think some of the housing community panel members have suggested strategies for increasing the number of units that we get in mixed-use projects, separate from lot consolidation. Things like minimum unit counts for mixed-use projects. And maybe there were some other ideas too, but a different way to tackle that issue that you identify other than lot consolidation. But I agree with you. HCD may see this amendment as going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I mean, and I can empathize a little bit.
But we have pointed out to HCD during our discussions, based on they also did, just to back up, they also did receive the letter from public advocates, which you have, and the city's response to public advocates' letter. One of public advocates' issues was that we have not implemented lot consolidation, and the city's response is, well, the lot consolidation is happening through the market. And we cited 3159 El Camino Real, which is a prime example of merging 4 lots that are underdeveloped. You have surface parking lot with the WeFix Mac, a small 900 square foot retail lot that is terribly underdeveloped, combining it to get, I believe, 35,000 square feet of retail or non-residential office space, and then also 48 rental units. And that is one example. 441 Page Mill Road, which is going through getting 10 units, including 3 affordable units, plus additional retail space. those are just two examples that the city pointed out that incentives aren't not quite necessary if the market's already taking care of those. And I believe there are other examples that we can point out. So those were in the housing element draft, some examples of lot consolidation. Yes, smaller, and it can be updated to show those larger developments.
So you're referring to your letter in response to public advocates of June 30th, is that right?
That is correct.
Where you have some data.
Yes.
Yeah, well, it might be effective. I mean, look at that carefully and see if you want to get some of that wording into the housing element, because right now the housing element does not seem to have it.
Absolutely. We can use it to strengthen our argument in the housing element.
Yeah. Councilmember Price.
Yes, I know I made this observation before about the actuality of the consolidation. I appreciate the examples you've given. However, that is not, in my mind, a major trend line, where we have a couple of examples. So a lot of this is market-driven, of course, we know this, and the interest of the owners of the properties. Do you think it's possible that HCD would think that we are putting sufficient attention into the consolidation issue? I mean, we've revised the program, but do you anticipate, if you could clarify, do you think they'll come back again and say, come on, guys and gals, let's have a little more teeth on this consolidation concept? Or do you think they will pass it?
That's a very good observation. I'm not sure about HCD. In reality, I believe it's public advocates, the group that submitted the letter. That's their emphasis. That's what they're looking for. So when they submit to HCD, it becomes HCD's concern about lot consolidation.
Right.
So yes, it's hard to say whether public advocates accepts a weakening or a diluting of a current housing program. And so I will say I have had a conversation with public advocates last week. They will be submitting another letter to HCD, and I believe, but I did send them a copy of today's staff report, but I haven't had a chance to follow up with the public advocate's attorney to see if that could be acceptable language to them.
Certainly on El Camino, that is the one of the major issues, as you know well from your work, in terms of all the constraints and the small frontage and all of that, making it very hard to redevelop properties and to have sort of meaningful additional or change land uses in that area. I had another quick question. I don't know if we're going to get to it separately, the issue of Buena Vista. Now that we've had a lot of correspondence on this topic, as we know, have you been advised by legal counsel here, or can you say in the city of Palo Alto, that advising us against having a little more language regarding that particular property or the implications regarding potential closure, or how are we addressing that? I don't remember, when I read it, I don't remember where it was, or, how cautious are we being in this arena?
Well, thank you for that question. Just to back up a minute, we are in this period in time where HCD is reviewing our element, and there's a section of the statute that basically says they can consult with other third parties about our housing element. And so advocates of all kinds take this opportunity to submit their comments to HCD, and what Tim and I and the city attorney are trying to do is respond to these letters when we're aware of them, so that at least HCD has our perspective when these issues are presented. We did get a letter last week from the public interest law firm representing the Buena Vista tenants, and so we're working on a response. In fact, we have one in our email inbox ready to go out. We just haven't gotten to it. I don't know if you got to it today. I didn't get to it today.
I didn't get sent a copy.
Oh, you didn't get a copy?
No.
Oh, gosh. Okay. So we've had counsel working with us, outside counsel, housing attorney working with us on a response to the letter that can go to HCD, so they have basically our perspective on this. I don't want to go too deep into it, but essentially we're trying to explain that we're a little constrained right now. We do have a program in the housing element that suggests we would like to do what we can to retain the Buena Vista or that we recognize Buena Vista as a source of needed low and very low income housing, and that we'd like to look for grants and funding to see what we could do to maintain it. The advocates are saying that program isn't good enough and we haven't implemented it enough. And in our response, I believe we're going to explain that we're just a little constrained right now while this issue of the mitigation is pending before the hearing officer, because the hearing officer's decision is going to get appealed to the council, and we can't prejudice the council's action. So when that letter goes out, I'll make sure that you all get a copy so you see what our public statement's going to be in response to this letter.
Now, isn't one of the responses that are part of the problem is HCD that does not recognize Buena Vista as a part of our low-income housing?
Well, I mean, that's. I don't think that will be. That will make the public advocates or HCD feel good about what we're proposing. I mean, we're trying to write them a response that explains we feel like what we've done is adequate, that our program is adequate, and that we've implemented the program to the extent is feasible for us right now, and that we're engaged in this other process around. Mitigation.
But we would treat Buena Vista very differently if it was a part of our housing element. Is that right?
I don't know that that's a fair statement.
Think about it differently.
I don't think so. I think the program in our housing element recognizes it as an important source of low and very low income housing, period.
HCD does not. So HCD is asking us to look for housing aside from Buena Vista.
Well, the the state's exercise in identifying housing sites is always about identifying new sites. It's not identifying existing sites, with the few exceptions that we've talked about in this committee, where you can preserve existing deed-restricted housing. And now the as you're correct in pointing out, Buena Vista is not deed-restricted housing that we could get credit for preserving.
Right. I think that's the distinction.
But I guess the value we could bring is to make investments in the housing in Buena Vista if HCD was flexible in their interpretation.
I think we're going a little farther into this issue than maybe is appropriate. Why don't I get you a copy of the letter, and if you have further questions, I'd be happy to discuss them. We do have an existing program that we're talking about carrying forward into the next housing element that addresses Buena Vista, and I think it's about as far as we can go right now.
Okay, well, that would be helpful to get your letter. Karen?
There you go. So, a few questions. Policy or program H1, the first one here on the page, easier to say, on page 3, pack up page 9. It's provide incentives to developers such as reduced fees or flexible development standards to encourage preservation of existing rental cottages and duplexes currently located in the R1 and R2 residential areas. So, two things. One is there is currently there's currently in our zoning code that, and this was intended to cover, from my perspective, being involved with this at the commission, it was intended to cover both R1 and R2, whereby you can't combine lots to create a lot that's greater than, which in the code is 9,999 square feet, since a standard, or a typical lot is 5,000 square feet in Palo Alto. So it was
6,000.
That's what the code is, but the typical lot's 5,000. That's why it was 9,999. You're right, 6,000 is the code, but that minimum lot size, but that's not what we were trying to address. And the reason that we did that was because there were a lot of lots being bought up and houses being torn down and out of character, out of scale, houses were being built, and we're also losing, so it was impacting the neighborhood quality, but it was also eliminating housing units. So it was intended to also cover R2. So part of here, what's being addressed here is lot combining, but it seemed to me that we ought to also have something in our housing element and carried over into our code where we couldn't combine R2 lots if it resulted in a reduction of housing units. It seems like that we ought to be doing that. I mean, because R2 is specifically intended to have more than one housing unit, and yet we're allowing them to be combined and tearing down 2 and building 1. So
just to clarify, you're suggesting that we add a new program that would consider prohibiting the combination of lots in the R2 if it results in the loss of housing.
that's right. And we had, and I've referred to this before, there was, I always forget to program or policy, but H29 previously, that addressed not lot combining, but it addressed loss of housing units. If there were not condo conversion, if there were 3 or more units, then if it was going to be fewer units that was going to be replacing those, then there were stipulations they had to meet, a developer had to meet, and then it was challenged. So the staff hasn't for a long time supported that. But there was supposed to be something that supplanted that or replaced that, and it never has happened. So the ones I'm putting forward are the ones that would put a restriction on lot combining in R2 zone if resultant development reduced the number of existing housing units.
Mm-hmm.
And another one is, well, what I just said, it's like something that would take the place of H29 that was legally defensible. And I wasn't sure and didn't remember that this committee, anyway, I think this is a recommendation by the committee, I think. I need to reread this. On packet page 10, page 4, program H1.1.2, which says delete amnesty program language for illegal residential second units. It was recommended for, here it is, recommended for removal by the committee, by the community panel. Why would we want to eliminate that? Because, I mean, what we want to try to do is, if possible, get those existing cottages to be in conformance from a code standpoint. Is it, they don't want to eliminate them here because we couldn't count them still as housing units, or?
Yeah, I'm afraid I think I've probably prevailed on the community panel to eliminate that one. I've had experience with these programs before. They're very time-consuming. You end up actually losing units because you end up finding units that you can't legalize. They're just not, they can't be brought up to code, and so people end up losing their homes. And you also, there's this argument about whether it's really helping you meet your RENA because these are existing units, even if they're not legal units, and will they let you count them? And so it's a lot of energy around a very few number of units. And so I was able to prevail on the panel to say maybe that's not our priority. We have so many other programs.
So the second part of that I can certainly understand because it doesn't help the housing numbers. Mm-hmm. But an amnesty program seems like if somebody wanted to bring it in, I mean, it's not like the city's going to go out there and try to get people to do it. So as far as the time-consuming aspect of that, don't know. Why did I circle this?
I think we would like to know the committee's feelings about these programs, these suggestions on packet page 10 and 11, about whether you agree with these ideas as things that we could try and add in when we're responding to HCD's comments, or whether you think, or whether you disagree.
Let's first make sure there's no other comments on the existing recommendations. If not, we'll move on to number 3.
Okay.
Councilmember Sharp, did you have
I do. So I probably wouldn't support most of Karen's suggestions she just made. So I wanted to get that out there.
Do you want to say why?
Well, we can go through them. They're really supposed to be discussed under number 3, frankly. Additional programs to be considered in the housing element. We move on to that.
Okay.
So I think we can have that discussion there. I think what we're supposed to do right now is go through the current goals, policies, and programs. Correct?
Well, if I can clarify, this committee has already made recommendations on the things in item number 1, and that's reflected here by the.
So number 2 is where we're looking, right?
We really should focus on number 2 and 3.
So are we breaking 3 out right now or not? Because you just said we were, so I was.
Yeah, if we are finished making comments on 2, then let's turn to 3.
Okay, so on 2, I support deleting the amnesty language as well. I think that's for the reasons you stated. I was a little confused on how that works anyway. If someone converts their garage, for instance, how long does it have to be converted before it's an amnesty, before you could come in amnesty under the current program? Because that's my big concern, is people convert their garages and there's no parking.
I mean, that's what makes amnesty time-consuming. You have to negotiate a whole program, what's going to be allowed, what isn't going to be allowed. You know, how old does the illegal unit have to be, or can it be something someone put in yesterday? And
Well, that's why in things like this, you put in for units that existed prior to 1985 or something like that.
I mean, you could design a program, absolutely.
Let's see, if we want to make a change, why don't we have a motion and introduce changes?
So looking at the rest of these, so what is the Colorado Park? Remind me on the 23 units, and what are we doing, and why Colorado Park? And I mean, what's going on?
Remember,
here?
that was actually part of the council's action on the sites. This is the project, the existing project that we can count towards our RENA.
Oh, okay, I get it now. I got it.
Existing units.
Perfectly get it. Okay, I just couldn't remember what that was. So when we added the program to continue site review, this is what we continue on after certification. You actually need to put a program that says that we're going to do this, so they know it's coming? Or, I mean, I'm just confused as to why, because you told us we could amend the housing element anytime we want as a council. I just wasn't sure why you'd actually have a program
Well, I
in there.
think it was the way the council was, making an affirmative commitment that we were going to do this.
Okay.
By putting it in the housing element.
Okay.
Yeah, I consider that very important.
Okay. No, I don't have any problem with it. I was just curious as to how HCD views that. And
Well, and once it's in as a program, we have a responsibility to implement it and monitor it and report to them on how it's going and all that stuff, so.
so, I understand, Councilmember, this is why I was raising the issue. I too believe we've made this commitment to the community. I fully support it. I'm actually the one that advocated for it, if you recall,
Advocated for which?
for doing this
Oh, yeah.
over Councilmember Schmidt's objections, if I recall.
Which item are we talking about? Help me out.
H2.2.5.
Oh, yeah.
First one.
I got
Right.
it.
So I said, I advocated for this over Councilmember Schmidt's objection. So I strongly believe in this. But I also believe that you have to watch unintended consequences. And so that's really my concern, is once you put something in the housing element, the housing advocates are always involved in the process. You bring in a regional body to bear on what we're doing in Palo Alto. It seems that we don't gain anything by doing this other than oversight by HCD, by putting it in here of how we do it. And so I'm just raising whether or not that then brings in people who say, well, you've committed to doing this, and your housing element's good for 8 years, that program stays in there for the next 8 years. Or does it, and people, we try and remove that program, people use it to say, well, of your 3,000 RENA number, what do we have, 2,000 roughly? Of your 2,000 RENA numbers, only 400 in your 2 are, and you're now ready to finish your comp plan, and you're making these amendments, but it doesn't look like you're getting the housing. Therefore, you really should be rezoning other sites as well, because this program is an ongoing obligation to do stuff. I'm just wondering if people will start trying to manage our process in Palo Alto in ways, you don't think so?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can draft this program in a way that doesn't have that consequence. I also think it's a little bit of a settled matter. The council directed us to include
Okay.
this program.
All right, fair enough. I was just,
And this program would be, excuse me, Councilmember Scharf, I think that, inclusion in this program, we already met the baseline. It's certified. So if we do site review, we're just making it better. And so from an HCD perspective, I don't think they would really, I don't think, maybe they've never seen this program anywhere else. So I don't think there's any large consequence.
Well, you know, the reason I thought about
Keep
this
it or remove it.
is I actually read the argument from somebody on the Maybell site, which said, hey, they didn't overturn it in the housing element, so therefore you should have kept it zoning. You should have kept it zoning. That was one of the letters we received, right? I mean, that's really stretching things in my view. And so it seems to me that there's no shortage of people that would love to get involved in Palo Alto's process from a regional perspective and try and force us to do things we don't want to do. And so that was my only concern, was basically making sure that we push back against having that and don't open ourselves up to stuff. But if you feel good about it, and council directed it, I'm fine with it.
Can I comment on that?
I don't mind if you want to jump in.
So the thing that I find a little bit troubling about it, to go to Councilmember Sharp's point, is that it says to continue site review after HCD. It's just like, you know, I think the language is, it sounds like it's a commitment to do that. So I think just changing the language.
Now you're getting to my point. Exactly.
Yeah, it's not a commitment to do that. It's like it needs to be language that allows us the ability to amend the site selections.
Just to clarify, this is not the verbatim language, so.
Right, but we're commenting
yeah.
just so that you can
Okay.
get the
The
point.
intent.
Get the
So
point, yeah.
getting back to, you said council approved this. My recollection, what we voted for was to, I mean, it could be off, but my recollection was that we voted to continue to do this, not that we voted to put it in the housing element. You actually voted in the staff report that we put it in the housing element?
That's actually the way I remember it, but I'd be happy to check the action minutes.
Right. Because, yeah, I don't know. That at least, I don't know if that was clear to you, Karen, when we voted on that, but I thought we committed to doing it. I didn't know we committed to putting it in the housing element, frankly.
I'm not sure, but somewhere there needs to be captured so that, you know, whoever's along here in, 5 years or so knows that we do have the ability to do that and voted to have that ability.
Well, actually, I thought what we voted to do was to continue the process that we started now and complete it because we had the gun to our head of having to get this certified.
Okay,
The notion
I-
wasn't that we would do it in, 3 years. The notion is we do it now. and
I
then
think we
open it
need
up.
a motion or move on.
I don't think so.
I don't-
Well,
I disagree with you.
all right.
If you
But
want to take a vote to say I'm wrong,
we
go
are
ahead.
talking
But I
about
don't think so.
council activities, and this is,
We're clarifying what the council did, which is clearly an important thing to do to understand where we are in the process right now. Chair Schmidt.
All right, so the wording that we've included in the draft is on page 134.
Okay.
It says the city will continue to identify more transit-rich housing sites, including in the downtown and Cal Ave, after HCD certification as part of the comprehensive plan update process, and consider exchanging sites along San Antonio and sites along South El Camino that are outside of identified, quote, pedestrian nodes for the more transit-rich identified sites.
Okay, so that's what that refers to. Okay, that clarifies it, makes me feel better.
Okay.
We talked about the shared housing and, yeah, so I would make a motion that we support the items in number 2.
Second.
okay. Do you want to speak to your second?
No, I think points have been made. I appreciate the staff work, and if we can move forward.
Okay, any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
That passes. So we move on to point number 3, additional programs suggested by the committees. Anyone want to lead off the discussion?
Yeah. It goes back to, and sorry I jumped ahead to number 3 earlier, but it goes back to what I was saying, where we don't allow lot combining in R2 unless we end up with no fewer housing units. because that's consistent with the purpose of the zoning, as a matter of fact. So that's one, so I'd make a motion to that effect.
Okay, do you want to state the motion?
Yeah, so the motion is that we include a program where we will, I don't know how you want it written as a housing element issue, because I'm thinking it was a zoning thing, but it is a housing thing, so that we, I'm just going to say it as a zoning and you'll make it, okay, that we not allow lot combining in R2 zones that will be, that would result in fewer than the existing number of housing units.
To not allow, is that right?
Right. Where we'd end up with a project that would result in fewer than the existing number of housing units.
Not allow consolidation in R2 that would reduce?
The number of existing housing units.
Okay, motion, is there a second? I'll second it for discussion.
Well, I'll repeat a little bit of what I was saying earlier. We essentially do this in R1 because we don't allow R1 lots to be combined because we were losing housing units. And it seems to be it's oxymoronic, if not schizophrenic, that we don't do the same thing in R2. And I can take you around and show you occasions in R2 zones where lots have been combined and we end up with very large single homes that reduce 2 or more, especially 2, smaller existing units. So it's regressive. It's absolutely regressive. And that's why I'm promoting that and also trying to find something that will, you know, over the years, staff and different staff has been promising they would bring something that would replace H29, which hasn't happened yet. The comp plan policy of H29, it's in there, should be in housing. But may not be in
Okay.
there. So,
I guess I second it. It seems to make sense. Any other comments?
So I would want to know how often this happens, where it looks, this seems really off the cuff to suddenly include this in here and say, we're going to do this without any real analysis by staff or any thought. I mean, is this happening a lot? What do these places look like? I mean, how often do lots get combined in the R2 zoning, where you actually end up with less housing units? I'm not sure that I quite get if this is an issue in search of a problem or if it's really going on a lot. We don't even have that much R2.
well, I was mentioning that I could take you to places where it has happened. So,
I'm sure it's happened once,
I'd.
maybe one and a
You're
half
cranky today. You are just cranky today, Greg. You just are.
Let's see, Councilmember Bryce
And
has
so-
a comment.
So hang on just a second. So I'm not going to send staff out on trying to get a bunch of data to support this. It's either a good policy or it isn't. And if it happens once or if it happens 5 times, to me, that's too many and it's regressive and it's inconsistent with what we did in R1.
Well, I could see situations in which you have
Councilmember Price.
Thank you. I guess I was going to ask the staff, you know, in other housing elements that you've worked on, has this been an issue in other communities in terms of these kinds of policies, as let's say, particularly related to R2? Or is this not? I just wanted to get some sense of comparison.
Well, we were just talking down there that I think the larger issue, you know, the loss of existing housing stock is a housing element issue that comes up across jurisdictions.
Right.
In a community with, you know, where there are people buying up smaller homes and replacing them with bigger homes. That's one thing, but if you're ending up with a net loss of units, you know, that is a policy issue that a lot of communities struggle with.
Mm-hmm. 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 And isn't it also correct that on the R1 that there are zones, residential zones, where people in fact can combine lots, but in fact what they're doing is they're in some cases they're combining lots that were 2 single-family homes. Now it's 1 mega home, And we do have some restrictions already in the code, which, restricts the extent to which that can happen. So, yes, absolutely. So I guess I guess I'm always concerned. I mean, the issue of the loss of housing units, I understand that, but I guess I'm always concerned about making it possible to have some flexibility as we move forward, because I don't really have a good recollection of how much R2 even exists in our community. And given the market nowadays, I'm not even sure R2 is really a terribly viable housing product. I'm not seeing developers line up in great numbers to develop R2 properties, because in this market with the value of land here, I just don't see that. So I guess for those reasons, I'm not comfortable with adding that restriction. Although I understand the concept, I'm just I guess I'm not convinced.
There's an example on Webster. I believe it's either just above or just south of Forest, where somebody bought an R2 where there were 2 existing units, and they kept them both, restored them both. Actually, this is one of those demolition things, definition of demolition, but they retained them both, restored them, rebuilt them, and kept them. So I think there's at least one simple example in an area near me where the market did say keep them both.
Okay.
So anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'd just make the comment is we do live in an urban area that is densifying, and we're dealing with an issue of how do we provide housing. So it seems to me that allowing something in an R2 neighborhood which would decrease density goes against what the fundamental program is. Okay, if there are no other comments, all in favor? Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
2-2, it does not pass.
But it will be presented to council, right? Because
No, it doesn't get presented to council. That's the way it works. So you can bring it up at council.
Yeah, you can make a motion at council. Okay, anyone else have suggestions on the list?
on 3,
Yeah.
Yes, 3, the bullet related to consider developing specific plans. Specific plans by state law have particular elements. I think we've discussed that in the past. Is there any reason we haven't said, we can't consider saying specific plans or precise plans? Or is just a given, we have those options, but would it be more comprehensive to mention both options? And there may be, other ideas out there too, but.
Yeah, I actually think that would be good, because, as you say, specific plans are specific in the law, and we might want the flexibility to do
Right.
something similar, but
Got it,
of our
got
own
it.
making. So specific
Okay.
plans or precise plans?
Right.
Is that program language generally something that the committee feels comfortable recommending to council?
Yeah, I think it's
I think
a
so.
clear implication from our earlier discussion about this not being a final list, but that we will go down and look, and I think specific or precise plans in certain areas are what we need to do. Okay, anything else?
Yeah, so one of the
Councilmember
things
Sharp.
you asked us to do is to look at these items on 3, right, and tell you whether or not we agree. I actually think they're pretty good suggestions. I don't know what the staff thought about them. Do you have any input on these? Did you have any concerns about any of them?
Well, we actually kind of like these there was quite a debate at the committee, because there's people representing a
Right.
variety of interests, and so these were the ones that managed to garner enough support or
Good for you.
little enough opposition to fail. So I did notice one typo in the policy we were just talking about the specific plans. At the very end, it says, consider developing these plans to implement in the updated comprehensive plan, but it should say just to implement the updated plan, because the idea is the comprehensive plan sets the vision, the specific or precise plans implement that vision.
Right, because it's
So
the
in is
implementation
an extra
technique.
extra
Yep.
word there.
Yep.
So I would move that we, unless staff has any concerns with these, I'd move that we actually go ahead and agree to incorporate these.
Second.
One question. Sure. Maybe the microphone. On the fourth bullet for the PTOD overlay for University Avenue downtown, to the extent that that is an opportunity presented by the train station, and the train station Company Avenue, would you want to have similar concept for Company Avenue?
Yeah, the California Ave and has the PTOD overlay there. Yeah.
Please.
So, I had a couple of 3 comments on this.
So I moved that.
I understand.
Did
Gail
we get a
seconded.
second? Gail seconded.
I did.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak?
So-
Oh, for a second.
Gail gets to
Yeah.
speak to her second.
No, thank you. I think this covers certainly a range of topics, and I think the way these are presented are fine. Appreciate the work of everyone involved in getting to this point.
Councilmember Holman.
So the first bullet seems to me needs to be clarified, and I know this isn't final language, but it seems to me it ought to be clarified, because it's, I support, I think, what it's trying to do, is consider allowing exclusively residential use on extremely small parcels currently zoned for mixed use by allowing the transfer of zoning requirements between adjacent parcels to create horizontal mixed-use arrangements. When it says transfer of zoning requirements, I'm not really sure that it's clear enough that it's intending to say, like, one parcel could be, yeah, commercial and the other parcel could be housing. So I think it just needs to be a little bit tighter in terms of language. I'm not sure how much it's likely to happen, you know. I mean, it's more likely to become, if this would happen, it'd probably be a lot combining, probably. But I'm supportive of, you know, if it can happen, fine by me. And the 3rd bullet, if you can talk a little bit more about that, explore requiring minimum residential densities to encourage more housing instead of office space when mixed-use sites develop. I'm not quite sure what that means.
This was what we talked about earlier. We're seeing mixed-use developments with like 4 housing units.
Mhm.
So they're mixed use, but it's a whole lot of office and a whole little bit of residential. And the idea is, could we modify the code to require a better balance? between
Yeah.
office and
Okay,
housing?
that's what this is getting at. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I'm not really, because of other things that exist downtown, I'm not really in favor of having a PTOD in the downtown area because of other zoning incentives like TDRs and that sort of thing that exist downtown. So I'm not in favor of the first part of that. And it seemed like that bullet ought to be 2 bullets anyway. The bullet about PTOD and the bullet about specific plans or precise plans. So I would want to break those out as 2 different bullets, and then I would not support the PTOD on University Avenue.
Okay, is there a second for that? No.
Okay. Why did I have a note on this one? Oh, no, it wasn't that. So then the other thing was, we don't have anything, unless I've overlooked it or it's something we looked at before, to continue to look for existing at-risk housing units. Have we already added something to that effect and I'm not remembering it?
Well, I'll have to double check, but in the current housing element, there was a program to look at existing units to help meet the city's RENA requirement. I think that was carried over. I don't think
that
it was
should be in
removed.
here.
So it should, if not, I'll double check, but it should be in the draft also.
Okay, if we can make sure that that's there.
Okay. Councilmember Holman?
I think that's it. I'm not supportive of the PTOD downtown, though, so if you want to separate that out, I can support the rest of it.
Okay, we'll do that. If I could make a comment on the next to last bullet, parking demand. Actually, I think under the lead ND, which the council has approved, there are criteria, not just for parking, but not just for housing, but looking also at available transit and services in the area of a building to determine parking and other attributes of the building. So I think there's a very rich process in the lead ND that would help support that in a richer sense. So you might take a look at that. Councilmember Price, did you have a comment?
Yes, this is probably an obvious question. Under the language in the staff report, consider this, consider that. But we're assuming that as we move through, that those then will be stated in the affirmative as existing programs. I mean, you're not going to put in a housing element, consider doing something. You're going to make more of a definitive statement in terms of action, are you not?
Well, we are actually thinking that we would leave a lot of these considers, because some of these may be very controversial things that once we get into the details, we find we don't have political or community support for. So we wanted to be careful about making commitments that we couldn't.
Okay. And politically, that's wise. But I guess my question is that housing, HCD, I don't recall, would they find this meeting an acceptable threshold in terms of commitment?
It depends, but I think that we already can show that HCD that we can meet our RENA requirement. And that is the baseline, is to accommodate their numbers. Yes, they would like to maybe see language that creates greater feasibility for providing these units, but the city has met its baseline requirements for this, so we can be a little more squishy, if you will, in our programs.
Okay, thank you. I had one other, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I've brought this up over a long period of time, but I still don't think it's in here anywhere. To consider affordable housing development standards. We've talked about affordable housing overlays. We've talked about some different development standards for affordable housing projects. But I don't think that we've captured it anywhere.
On page 3, there's that program H2116. Consider density bonuses and/or other concessions, allowing greater concessions. The wording's a little weird, but greater concessions for 100% affordable housing developments. I mean, I think the idea of that program was to allow real design flexibility for 100% affordable projects. You wanted to do something going in the other direction to make more requirements for affordable projects?
Well, it just seems to me like rather than having to hash each one of these out individually, it seems like if we could arrive at what, for instance, a reasonable parking ratio is for, let's just say, senior affordable housing, or, depending on the income level, or for, pick a category of affordable housing. If we could arrive at kind of predetermined parking ratios, for instance, for those projects. We wouldn't have to do an ad hoc every time, have the same argument, if the community could come together on that.
Well, and the parking issue is exactly what's meant by that bullet there. We're saying, let's develop the data we need, let's find the data we need to support those kind of standards for senior housing, affordable housing, and get everybody to buy in and adopt parking standards that will work for affordable housing.
Okay, the same thing for densities too. But so anyway, I'll leave that with you to add anything you want.
Okay, any further comments on number 3? Mark, do you have any general comments? Okay, I guess we have looked through the items there. Are there any comments?
Are we going to vote?
Excuse me?
Are we going to vote on the motion?
Oh, right. Sorry. Let's see. We have a proposal before us to
We're
look
splitting it out for
at,
parent.
yeah, at the items, and we have decided to look at the fourth bullet separately. So this will be bullet 1 through 7, except for 4.
4 is actually broken in, for my purposes, 4 is actually broken into 2 separate bullets. The first sentence is the 4th bullet, and then there's a new bullet, also consider developing specific plans.
Precise.
Okay.
The precise plans, yes.
So we have 8 bullets, and you want to pull just the 4th one out.
We have 7 bullets.
You've just added an 8th. 1, 2, 3.
No,
four,
just added a 7th.
7, right. So we have 7 bullets, and we are pulling out bullet number 5.
Pulling out 4.
2, 3. Pulling out 4, leaving 5 in. Okay. So all in favor of bullets 1 to 3 and 5 to 7?
Aye.
All opposed?
Am I following this correctly? I wanted to have that bullet 4 retained.
We all
gonna
do.
vote on
We're
it
gonna vote
separately.
We're going to vote very separately?
Yeah, we just pulled it out. We just split the
Oh,
question.
as a separate item.
We're
Got
gonna vote a
it, got
question.
it. Okay, I'm with you.
So what's your vote?
Yes.
Okay, that passes unanimously. Now we're going to vote on bullet number 4. Consider a PTOD for the University Avenue area. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? That passes 3 to 1. Okay, I guess we're on other considerations. I guess any comments on this would be appropriate, or elements in there?
You know, we didn't really put on the agenda or expect to do a detailed review of that. I think we'd welcome any comments or
Yeah.
questions you have about it, but
So if it's not on the agenda, we probably can't take it up.
those could happen anytime, although we
It
we
talks
actually,
about the review of the
Okay.
admin draft.
Yeah, it does say that. I would just like to make one general comment. It goes back to what the issue Councilmember Scharf raised of the how we pay for affordable housing. And it's a big part in here. There's a section on page 77, 78 that talks about the dollars available for affordable housing. There's a section on page 100 that talks about the VMR rates. There's a section on page 118 that talks about the affordable housing community fee. And it becomes an important and central focus. And I certainly wouldn't want to go ahead with a recommendation without having as clear a picture as possible. Now you say there's lawsuits, there's issues, and we have a nexus study underway. In here it says the nexus study will be completed in December, but you stated it would be completed in September.
The way it's going, maybe, yeah, December might be. We'll split the difference, look at November to try to get the Nexus study completed.
we
It's
should
just,
explain, it's a regional effort. We're participating in part of an effort that involves a lot of different jurisdictions in San Mateo County. So, you know,
Yeah.
Tim keeps in touch with the consultants on the group that's working on it, but we don't want to bring something to you until it's ready.
Yeah, I understand. I guess there's a philosophical problem I have is that, through the HCD, the RENA process, and ABAG, we are given housing allocations in here that is now built upon job growth. So there's a nexus they have established between job growth and our housing element. And what the current impact fees say, at least from the material I've been able to gather, is residential developments are paying substantially more in impact fees than commercial properties and developments. Now that's stated clearly, I think, on page 118. It seems to be stated clearly in the material we got from the recent Tausig studies. And that, the development impact fees do not even take into account the BMR impacts. If you add in the financial of the BMR impacts of the inclusionary zoning, housing is paying for a huge portion of our affordable housing. And it seems to me if ABAG has established a nexus between jobs causing housing growth, that jobs or the commercial sector should be paying more of our housing fees. Now that's a critical issue as we move forward, and certainly for the comp plan. The trick is we are doing the housing element before we've done the comp plan. So,
And Councilmember Schmidt, I haven't seen the results of the Nexus study, but it may show that also as part, in which you just stated that jobs should be paying more, or the commercial side should be paying more of the BMR funding. So and the Nexus study may show that. And it's just
I guess our
determined.
Our next meeting, we will be talking about this, and that is probably an issue I will bring up and ask for some details on. Councilmember Sharp, do you want to?
I do. So, a couple things. On Councilmember Schmidt's point, I don't necessarily disagree in terms of that it would be nice if commercial paid more for a number of reasons. I mean, I think you obviously, the more you burden housing with fees, the more expensive housing is. So I actually think that's a good thing. But on the other hand, I think we have to be careful when we say ABAG has said that jobs create the housing. They have, but there's a very weak link to our RENA number. And when you say that, the community thinks that what you're really saying is that by building commercial space, you are getting a larger RENA number. And that's simply not true. I mean, it's a very weak link. There is slight increase, but compared to other things, it's a very weak link. And I think it's important to be honest about that with the community. I think I have a big concern here that I'd like to just raise. And I think it's really what Karen said that triggered it in terms of parking, putting parking ratios and stuff. I don't think we should be putting any of that in the housing element. If we put something in the housing element, we lose local control. It's a really silly approach. If we put it in our zoning code, we as a council can come in and say, yeah, we thought that senior housing only drove one car, but the reality turns out that they have, 2 cars, and we've underparked this site. But now that you've put it in your housing element, you're stuck with it. You can't change it. So, well, HCD has to approve anything you take out of that housing element. Whereas if you put it in our zoning code, we as a council and the community can make that decision. So my concern is putting stuff in the housing element that limits our flexibility. It's a broad issue. I'm not using that. I was just using it as a particular example. What you want to say is we want to have as little in the housing element in terms of things that limit our flexibility as we can get away with, and then we should put that other stuff in the zoning. We shouldn't use the housing element to further our political beliefs at this moment and take flexibility away from the community and from the council of the future. That's really, I think, something we should. And so I would ask that if we're going to talk about this again, that we look at this and we come back and say, is there anything in here that's extraneous that we don't really need that's going to limit our community's flexibility on something that could cause a problem for us later?
So, question?
Councilmember Price?
Now, but as I recall, this whole issue of the parking and the study and that kind of thing, we just said that we wanted included.
Oh, I want the database. The database is a completely different issue.
Okay, all right. So the
Well,
data is included.
right.
So the comment I would make, though, about your comments would be that the issue of parking and site plan and design and density and housing do fit together. So to suggest that there is not an important relationship there in terms of ultimately what the overall yield of a particular parcel will be, frankly, doesn't make any sense. Now, we are saying that we are looking, I mean, the issue of the database, we agreed to that. Now, maybe I've missed something in the housing element that commits us a lot further down the road in terms of housing, parking.
It's not.
It's not. So, I mean, I feel that the database is not risky.
No, I think the database is great. I wasn't arguing against the
Okay,
database.
and ultimately, it will be codified in terms, if the results suggest that we need changes to the parking ratios, it will be codified, and yes, you're absolutely correct.
I was just arguing as an example, we shouldn't say this will be the parking ratio in our housing element, that belongs in our zoning code.
Well, and I,
Really,
right.
my argument. We don't have it that way, but there are other things like that. I was just using it as an
Okay,
example.
well, parking ratios won't be in, I guess what I'm saying
Right.
is parking ratios won't be in the housing element.
That's right.
So I don't know what
That's
the
right.
issue of concern is. That's what I'm trying to say.
So
That
it-
would be codified.
What I said is,
Councilmember Holman, did you have?
Yeah, I agree with Gail 100%. I mean, I agree with you about being able to maintain flexibility, but the housing element is part of the comp plan, and that's where we set policy. It's where we set policy. A housing element isn't the same thing as zoning, and that's why a lot of these programs and policies in here talk about consider this or consider that. So it doesn't commit us to the kinds of things that will actually be to this level of specificity that would be in a zoning code. So, but if we don't set the policy forth in our comprehensive plan, which the housing element is a piece of that, what are we going to base a decision on at council other than just like we're doing an ad hoc kind of consideration, driven by other external forces or desires, but not driven by comp plan?
Yeah, I guess I would follow up on that. This is a part of our comp plan. It is based on it and included in it. And I know over time, every time issues come up, we tend to look at this document as a source document of where we are, where we're going. So it becomes important on city issues on a continuing basis. And we want to make sure we have in there the things that are important to us and our future.
I don't disagree with any of that. I haven't made that argument at all. What I've said is you want to be cautionary because unlike other parts of the comp plan, this is special. The housing element is special because HCD approves it. We can change other parts of our comp plan anytime we want without having to go get approval by HCD. All I'm saying is that when you do your housing element, you want to be cognizant of the fact that you are bringing an outside agency of which we have no leverage over and which can dictate to us outcomes that we may be very unhappy with. And there is nothing we can do about it. And it actually riles the community up. The community actually thinks of ABAG as an HCD as the same entity. So when the community talks about, in fact, Councilmember Schmidt, I remember your ballot statement talked about standing up to regional mandates. In fact, this is what you ran on. And I'm just saying that this is what you ran on, and let's not get caught because we
Gotta
are
be
not
careful.
clear on what we're doing here.
But the housing element is not a state mandate. It's, a document is, but not the word.
We need the League of Women Voters here, don't we?
Yeah, Mark?
Well, in the comp plan, you've got transportation element. Transportation element has policies and programs where you have to, if you want this out of the ambit of HCD communication, you could use the possible transportation element in the appendix and appropriate amendment that.
That's a really good point.
Right. But there's nothing that goes too deep into this in this document.
Yeah.
I think this gets to the question that Councilmember Price asked earlier about why are these all just consider and explore? It's because we don't want to.
We promise we'll have it done by 2022.
Because then we are right in the palm of their hands.
Okay, right, because then they can come back and say enforce.
But see, one question I had is, this housing element is called 2007 to 2014. And the new one, although the cover says 15 to 23, inside it says 14 to 22. And that's because it starts January 1st, 2014.
The RENA cycle, yes, starts January 1st, 2014.
What's going to be?
However, the housing element planning period starts in 2015.
But all your tables say 2014 through 2022.
It's another one of these
Yeah.
little gifts from the state of California, that they define a RENA period that's different than a plan.
Slightly different.
So it's okay to have those two discrepancies.
Hopefully, they will make it uniform, but well, who knows?
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay, we look forward to September.
Okay, thanks.
Meeting adjourned.
Me.